Do you want to make more compelling photographic images of trains, model trains, people, animals, anything? Stay tuned. Making a compelling image requires a lot of things. The right equipment, knowledge of and use of the exposure triangle, a great subject, being at the right place at the right time. Heck, just making the effort to go out and be where a photograph is possible is very important. And one of the elements of making a compelling image is composition. Composition is what's in your frame and how are those things arranged within the frame. So today we're going to talk about and compare two rules of composition, the rule of thirds and what's known as the golden ratio or the golden mean. Now before we get too far, these are just guidelines. They don't guarantee a great image. And remember what Ansel Adams said, Ansel Adams being one of the greatest photographers of all time, certainly one of the greatest American photographers of all time. And that is, there are no rules for making great photographs. There are only great photographs. Now, the primary point to keep in mind about composition is this. Don't put your subject in dead center in the picture. Is this as aesthetically appealing as this? It's a subtle difference perhaps, but I think it's a distinctive difference. There's a big difference, and it's better to have your subject off center. Well, how off center should it be, Bob, you ask? Is this too far? Obviously. There are two competing rules about how to place your subject off center. Those are the rule of thirds and the golden ratio or the golden mean. Now the rule of thirds provides that you should trisect the frame of your photograph with two vertical lines and then two horizontal lines, all equally spaced from the 1/3 in from the outer edge. And the intersection points of those lines are the place where your subject matter should be centered in order for it to be aesthetically pleasing. So the rule of thirds is certainly a lot easier to apply in the field. You might have an overlay. If you're lucky, your camera may have an overlay in the viewfinder that you can apply. You can also buy overlays that you can apply to your screen if you have a touchscreen on your camera that has the rule of thirds grid to help you position things, and that's awesome. And there may be some for the golden ratio as well. That's a nice tool. It's a nice tool to have. But perhaps the most important thing when applying either the golden rule or the rule of thirds is make sure that you step back far enough from your subject. You have enough space around your subject in order to apply the crop effectively and to crop down to a rule of thirds or a golden ratio composition in post-processing. And that is a key here. When you're shooting in the field, you may not be able to achieve a perfect composition in terms of the rule of thirds or the golden ratio, but as long as you're close, your images are going to be better. Now, the golden rule or the golden mean is based on a number. I'm sure in school you remember the number pi, P-I, which was kind of magical and had all these special properties. Well, the golden rule is based on a similar number called phi, P-H-I, related to another Greek letter. And it relates to a few things in nature. The Great Pyramids and the Parthenon have got some numbers that are close. The way certain plants grow, the chambers in the chambers of a chambered nautilus supposedly are close to what the golden ratio is. Some of that's been debunked, but the reality is that it is aesthetically pleasing, and I think it's probably better than the rule of thirds. I think the rule of thirds place your subject a little too close to the edge of the frame. But the golden rule says that just like the Rule of thirds, you're going to trisect the frame going horizontally and vertically, but instead of coming in 1/3 from each side as you would in the rule of thirds, you come in 1.68 and change from either side. And so the vertical lines are a little closer together than they are in the rule of thirds. And the same thing with the horizontal lines. You come down 1.16, up 1.16. So those lines are closer together than in the rule of thirds, and it forces your subject a little bit closer to the center of the screen or the frame. I think it's more appealing. Well, now let's go to my computer where I'm going to actually apply the rule of thirds grid and the golden ratio or phi grid to several images, and then we're going to show some side-by-side comparisons of other images so that you can determine for yourself which one you think is most appealing. And I'm also going to show you an image or two where they don't really work if you apply either rule. You need to break the rule. So again, just remember that Ansel Adams quote. Well, here we've switched over to a photo editing program called Luminar to apply the grids. I've been a Photoshop user for a long time. It's expensive, it's complicated, it's hard for me to remember how to use it. It's a great program, does a lot of stuff, a lot more things than Luminar. But Luminar's $89 at this point, which is in February of 2020, and does everything that I like. It's also kind of similar to a lot of phone photo editing software with filters, although it has layers and lots of other capabilities. So I think you might want to consider using it. The photograph we're looking at is one that I took with my wife when we were driving across country from Southern California to Pennsylvania on a relocation. Beautiful sky, so a little few foreground images, as we'll talk about later, foreground elements. So a really good picture, and I believe I'm pulled far enough back from the image in order to do a proper job of applying the grids that we want to apply here. So over on the right, you can see there's a little button to click to edit the picture, and then you can click the crop button there, and it immediately applies the one of the two grids overlays. In this case, it immediately applies the rule of thirds grid. You can see there on the left hand side there's a button you can click to select between the rule of thirds and the golden ratio, or the phi grid as they call it in Luminar. So we're gonna go back to the rule of thirds grid, I believe, and start there. Sky element is really great in this picture. It really almost doesn't need any editing. But you'll notice there's a bridge that needs to be included in the picture, as we'll talk about later. This picture has the elements of a good landscape. Here's the focal point of the picture, which is the cab of the locomotive. There's actually a little spot of sunlight reflecting off that I'm going to use as the focal point. So let's go back to the rule of thirds grid. Notice we've got background elements. We've got our locomotive in the center, kind of in the middle distance. So we're going to shrink down the grid a little bit, and that's not bad. We might have to shrink it a little bit further to get it right on the exact focal point. Now notice if we shrink it down a long way and we get it exactly centered, the focal point of the picture on one of the intersecting lines, what happens is we've cut off the bridge over here on the left hand side, and honestly I thought that was a bad composition. It didn't look good. So we need to make the picture a little bit bigger and and still get that intersection point on the cab of the locomotive, but we still have the entire bridge in the picture. And so I think that looks pretty good right there. But again, the elements of a good landscape include a middle distance, far distance, and of course up front. So up front we have, in the foreground, we have some interesting foliage elements. In the background we have the sky, we have some mountains in the background, and then in the middle distance we have our primary subject, the train. So it's a pretty nice picture. Now what we could do differently here is you could position one of the lines of the grid, in this case the rule of thirds grid, right on the horizon line. So that would mean adjusting this just a little bit, changing it, not putting the focal point on the locomotive right on the intersecting point, but instead putting the line of the grid on the horizon. That's another approach certainly that could be done. Now here we've switched over to the golden ratio grid, and we're going to shrink down the grid a little bit. If I can find the handles on this, there we go. You can see we're not taking anywhere near as much of the picture out in order to apply the golden ratio, and there we have it. Now here I'm going to put on the screen side by side the two pictures, one the golden ratio version on the left and the rule of thirds version on the right, and you can compare the two, and I think I definitely prefer the golden ratio example, which is on the left. Now we're going to go over to see a few other images and compare rule of thirds and golden ratio examples, and the golden ratio example is always going to be on the left hand side. Now here's an image I took of a GATX demonstrator or lease unit. Can't remember exactly where. The again, the golden ratio version is on the left, the rule of thirds is on the right, and honestly I like the one on the left a little bit better. There's a little more space in front of the locomotive. The locomotive is a little more centered. There's a little less sky. It's just, I think, a more appealing image. Really like this picture, and I'm glad I got out and captured it. You know, you need to get out and use your camera. You need to make plans to get out in the morning, on the weekends if you are a working stiff like me. Get out when there's some nice morning light, and the railroad may not be in operation even on a Sunday morning, and so you're going to have some nice static subjects to take pictures of. I'm going to follow this up here by showing you the final version of this picture after I've applied a few filters. I love to make my pictures look more painterly and less photographic, and a little bit brighter saturated colors, and I just really like this image. I really got it prepped up just for this YouTube video, and I'm really happy I did. I will definitely be putting this on my screensaver and sharing this, an image I would be glad to show to my model railroad friends. Now the next picture is one I took at the CN yard in Memphis, a lot of yards in Memphis. Again, golden ratio on the left, rule of thirds on the right. The focal point is the headlight of the locomotive that's closest to us. And again, I like the golden ratio picture so much better. It's just the focal point is centered in the picture. There's a little bit less sky. Everything is a little bit more balanced to my eye. I just absolutely prefer that image. Now the next image is an image I took while driving across country with my dog, either from Phoenix to Dallas or back or the other way. There was a nice locomotive, grain elevator, and on the way out of town I saw this derelict Santa Fe reefer and had to stop, and I took a number of pictures and have a couple of pictures printed up of this scene. But here, again, golden ratio on the left, rule of thirds on the right. I centered the picture and picked as my focal point the door of the reefer. That might not have been the best choice because it did move everything towards the left, but I think you can at least see that the golden ratio puts our subject a little bit closer to the center of the frame and gives us a little bit more sky in this instance, and a little bit more balanced image. So I really do think that is the better of the two images. Now the next image is going to be this image that has had AI enhancement from Luminar. Luminar provides some push button stuff to really make some quick changes to images, and I really think this is pretty close to what I would have done anyway. The sky is nicely enhanced. Luminar has the sliders. You can make your own saturation, sharpness adjustments, everything, a full featured set, but just AI enhancement with one button, boom. I was really pretty close to where I wanted to be with some more saturated colors and more beautiful sky. Just a nice job by Luminar, and really like this image. Now the next image is an image I took in San Bernardino. Sorry, a lot of BNSF here, but I was out west. Again, golden ratio on the left, rule of thirds on the right, and I really like the golden ratio image better. There's a little more balance to the picture, and subject matter just looks better. Again, using the headlighted locomotive as the focal point. Just prefer the golden ratio shot. Although you might like the rule of thirds, I get it. And here is a final image where I've done some editing. It looks a little toy-like, but again, I do like to have my images looking a little less photographic, a little more graphic. So not totally in love with the enhancements I made here. I did not use AI enhancement on Luminar to get this effect. So, but sky looks good. I did use a Luminar sky enhancement, and that really helped the contrast there. Well, here we are back in Luminar. This is a shot I took at the Cajon Summit, pretty popular rail fanning spot. Blessed with a great day. Some clouds in the sky, which you don't usually have in Southern California. And also down here in the foreground, you see we have these yellow flowers as a foreground element, which is very critical. Now, maybe I didn't, zoom far enough back out away from this scene, but there's not a lot of room to manipulate things and keep those yellow flowers visible, as well as this back curve of the train in the picture. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the grid here and see what we can do. So this is the rule of thirds grid. And the focal point of the picture is obviously the headlight of the locomotive. So I'm going to try and position that. And you can already see that with the rule of thirds, in order to get the headlight right on the spot, there we go. The yellow flowers are pretty much eliminated from the picture, and the back curve of the locomotive is also cut off. So that's not a good situation. That's not going to work. So we switch over to the golden ratio, and we can clearly include a little bit more in our scene, which is nice. However, think you can see we're going to have to get a little bit smaller. We're getting close, but we're also here on the right hand side. We're getting far too close to the edge of the picture, and so using the golden ratio here as well is not going to work. So unfortunately, what we have is a situation where the original image is the best we're going to get. So this is an example where you have to ignore the rule and acknowledge that you already have a good picture here, even though our focal point is kind of centered. It's still a good picture. So don't be afraid to not use the rule when the situation calls for it. Well, thanks for watching. I hope you learned a little something about composition that'll help you take pictures of trains, model trains, or anything else for that matter. If you enjoy this content, please consider subscribing. Hit the little bell icon to receive notifications of content that I produce in the future. This is Bob Johnson with PK&W Railroad, signing off. Until next time, happy photography, happy rail fanning, and most of all, happy modeling.